The smell of grilled burgers and sizzling barbecue filled the warm summer air. Laughter rang out as kids splashed in a backyard pool, neighbors chatted, and plates piled high with food were passed around. It was supposed to be a perfect afternoon. But then, a voice cut through the joy like a knife. "Excuse me, what do you people think you're doing?" Everyone turned. There she stood, arms crossed, phone in hand, eyes filled with disapproval. The self-appointed neighborhood watchdog ready to shut it all down. And within minutes, the police were on their way. What she did not know was that she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Before we go any further, subscribe to the channel and comment below where you are watching from. For our returning subscribers, thank you so much for your unwavering support. It truly means a lot to our community. For the Johnson family, their annual summer BBQ was more than just a tradition. It was a way to bring the community together. Every year, they fired up the grill, invited friends and neighbors, and turned their backyard into a space filled with laughter, music, and good food. This year was no different. Or at least that's what they thought. Because in the middle of their celebration, a familiar problem showed up. Her name? Susan Whitaker. And she was about to turn this joyful afternoon into a confrontation. Susan Whitaker had lived on this street for over 10 years. And in her mind, that meant she was the unofficial ruler of the neighborhood. She had an opinion on everything: how loud people's music should be, how late porch lights should stay on, and most importantly, who belonged here. And in her opinion, the Johnson family did not, even though they had lived there for 3 years, even though they owned their home just like she did, even though they had never once caused trouble. Susan still treated them like outsiders. And today, she had finally found her excuse to act on it. It had started earlier in the afternoon. She had been sitting in her pristine backyard, sipping iced tea, when she heard it. Laughter. The sound of people having fun. And worst of all, music. It was not even loud music, just a smooth classic soul playlist playing through a Bluetooth speaker. But to Susan, it might as well have been a rock concert. Her jaw tightened. Her fingers gripped her glass. And by the time she heard someone start up the grill, she had had enough. "This is a quiet neighborhood," she muttered under her breath. "And I won't let them ruin it." With purpose in her step, Susan stormed across the street, straight toward the Johnsons' backyard. She did not knock. She did not wait for an invitation. She simply pushed open the gate and walked in. The laughter died instantly. All eyes turned toward her. The Johnsons' father, Michael, looked up from the grill, tongs in hand. Can we help you?" he asked, eyebrows raised. Susan ignored the polite tone. Instead, she scanned the yard, lips pursed, looking for something to justify what she was about to do. Finally, she settled on the speaker. "This is unacceptable," she snapped. "This is a family neighborhood. We don't need loud parties disturbing everyone." Michael exchanged a glance with his wife, Danielle, who had just stepped outside holding a tray of drinks. "It's a Saturday afternoon," Danielle said slowly. "We're not bothering anyone." Susan scoffed. "Not bothering anyone. I can hear your music from inside my house." Michael sighed, already tired of this conversation. "Susan, the volume is low. No one else has complained. We do this every year." But Susan? She was not listening. She had already decided she was right, and nothing was going to change her mind. "I don't care if you do this every year. I'm calling the police." Gasps rippled through the gathering. Danielle's jaw dropped. Calling the police? Over a barbecue? Susan nodded sharply, pulling out her phone. "This is a public disturbance, and I have every right to report it." Michael ran a hand down his face, trying to stay calm. "Susan, please, don't do this." But Susan? She already had the phone to her ear. "Yes, hello? I'd like to report a disturbance." "There's a loud, unruly gathering happening on my street," Susan said, voice dripping with fake concern. "It's gotten out of hand, and I feel unsafe." Unsafe. Michael could not believe what he was hearing. His family was grilling burgers and passing out lemonade. What part of that was unsafe? Danielle shook her head, muttering, "Unbelievable." The entire party had gone silent, everyone now watching Susan in shock, because they all knew what she was doing. She was not scared. She was not uncomfortable. She was simply using the police as a weapon. And what happened next would turn everything upside down. The sound of sirens filled the air. Within minutes, a police car pulled up in front of the Johnsons' house. Susan smirked, crossing her arms. Finally, she muttered under her breath, but as the officer stepped out of the car, her smirk disappeared. Because the officer? He was black. And the second his eyes landed on Michael, he broke into a grin. "Mike, hey man, how's it going?" Michael chuckled, setting down his tongs. "Hey, Officer Green, didn't expect to see you today." Susan blinked rapidly, looking between them in confusion. "Wait, you two know each other?" Officer Green nodded. "Yeah, Mike and I go way back. Our kids play on the same soccer team." Susan's face drained of color, because suddenly, she realized how bad this looked, and it was about to get worse. What happens next? Officer Green turned to Susan, crossing his arms. "Ma'am, did you seriously call 911 over a barbecue?" Susan stammered, her confidence shrinking fast. "I just thought—" "No." The officer cut her off. "You assumed." The tables had completely turned, and the consequences she never expected were coming for her fast. Susan's confidence crumbled in an instant. Her arms, once firmly crossed, now hung awkwardly by her sides. Her smug expression? Gone. Because Officer Green was not playing along. And now, the power dynamic had completely shifted. "Officer, you don't understand," Susan stammered, her voice suddenly uncertain. "I wasn't trying to cause trouble. I was concerned about the noise level." Officer Green's eyebrows lifted slightly, unimpressed. "Concerned?" he echoed. "Ma'am, this is a backyard barbecue. I don't hear any loud music. I don't see any unruly behavior. I see people enjoying their Saturday." Susan's mouth opened and closed, searching for an argument. "Well, I thought maybe they didn't have permission to use the space." Danielle, who had been holding back until now, finally spoke up. "Permission?" she repeated, her voice sharp with disbelief. "Susan, this is our own backyard." A few guests chuckled quietly, shaking their heads. Officer Green crossed his arms, giving Susan a long, hard look. "So, let me get this straight," he said. "You saw your neighbors who have lived here for 3 years having a normal cookout, and instead of talking to them like an adult, you called 911? Susan's face turned red. "It's not like that," she insisted. "I just thought—" "No." Officer Green cut her off, his tone flat and final. "You assumed." From the sidewalk, a few other neighbors had gathered, watching the scene unfold. One of them, Mr. Lopez, a retired teacher who had lived on the street for over 20 years, stepped forward. "I've been to the Johnsons' barbecue every year," he said, shaking his head. "Never had a problem. This is ridiculous." "Agreed," another woman added, arms crossed. "Susan, you didn't call the cops when the Wilsons had their block party last month. But suddenly, a black family having a barbecue is a problem." The murmurs grew louder, and Susan's face got even redder. Because now, it was not just the police questioning her. It was the entire neighborhood. And suddenly, she was not the concerned neighbor. She was the villain. Michael, who had been watching quietly, finally stepped forward. "Susan," he said calmly, "I want to ask you something." Susan shifted uncomfortably. "What?" she muttered. Michael's voice was steady, powerful. "If my family looked different, if we looked like your Sid, you have still made that call?" Silence. Complete silence. Susan's face twitched, her lips parting like she wanted to deny it. But she could not, because everyone knew the answer. And Susan had never felt more exposed. Officer Green let the moment hang before speaking again. "Ma'am," he said, "this was a waste of police resources. We have real emergencies to respond to, and this was not one of them." Susan's eyes widened in panic. "I didn't mean—" "If we get another call like this from you," he continued, cutting her off, "there will be consequences." Susan visibly swallowed, her breathing shallow. Consequences? Officer Green nodded. False police reports are a serious offense. If this continues, you could face a fine or worse. Susan's entire body stiffened. A fine? Legal trouble? This was not how she thought this would go. She had expected the police to side with her. But instead, she had completely humiliated herself. As Officer Green finished his warning, one of the Johnsons' guests, a woman named Nina, stepped forward. "You know, Susan," she said, "since you're so concerned about neighborhood rules, I have an idea." Susan blinked. "What?" she asked warily. Nina smirked. "How about we report every time your dog barks past 9 p.m., or when your sprinklers flood the sidewalk?" The crowd laughed. Susan's face twisted in anger, but she said nothing, because now she was the one being called out. And the worst part? She could not do a thing about it. What happens next? The officers turned back to Michael and Danielle, offering a quick nod. "Sorry to interrupt your party," Officer Green said. Michael smiled, shaking his head. "Not your fault. But thanks for setting things straight." With that, the officers walked back to their patrol car. And Susan? She did the only thing she could do. She turned on her heel and stormed back to her house. But she did not realize her biggest consequence was yet to come, because by the next morning, her entire neighborhood and the internet would know exactly what she did. Susan slammed her front door shut, her hands shaking as she locked it behind her. Her plan had backfired spectacularly. She had expected the police to side with her. She had expected the Johnsons to be the ones embarrassed. But instead, she was the one who had been publicly humiliated. And now, she was about to face consequences she never saw coming. The next morning, Susan stepped outside to grab her newspaper, hoping that maybe just maybe everyone had already forgotten what happened. But she was wrong. The moment she stepped onto her porch, she noticed it. The stares from her neighbors. Some of them shook their heads as they walked past. Others muttered under their breath. And then, she spotted Mrs. Lopez and Mr. Carter, standing on the sidewalk, speaking in hushed tones. She could feel their disapproval. Susan's face burned with embarrassment, because it was clear she had become the villain of her own neighborhood. That afternoon, Susan's phone would not stop buzzing. She frowned, grabbing it from the counter only to see dozens of missed calls and messages. Then, a text from her sister popped up. "Susan, what did you do? You're all over the internet." Susan's heart dropped. Her fingers shook as she opened Facebook. And there it was. A video the entire incident, recorded by multiple neighbors, had been posted online. And the title? "Karen calls cops on black family's BBQ. Gets a taste of karma instead." Susan's breath caught in her throat. She clicked on the video, her own voice playing back at her. "This is a quiet neighborhood. I don't want loud parties disturbing everyone." Then came Officer Green shutting her down. "Ma'am, you called 911 on a barbecue? This is not a crime. This is a waste of police resources." The comment section was brutal. Imagine being this mad about people grilling food. How miserable do you have to be to call the cops on a cookout? She really thought she was about to win. I love the way the officer shut her down. That moment when the whole neighborhood turns against her. Love to see it. Susan felt sick. The video had been shared over 2 million times. She was being mocked by thousands of people. And the worst part? She had no way to stop it. The backlash did not stop online. A few days later, Susan received a formal letter from the Homeowners Association, HOA. She tore it open, her hands trembling, and read, "Due to multiple complaints regarding your harassment of neighbors, the HOA is issuing an official warning. If any further incidents occur, fines will be applied, and additional actions will be considered. Failure to comply may result in community voting for forced removal." Susan's stomach churned. They were threatening to kick her out of the neighborhood. And she knew they were serious, because no one was on her side anymore. While Susan's life fell apart, the Johnson family was experiencing the exact opposite, because what started as a humiliating moment turned into an incredible opportunity. One evening, Michael received an unexpected phone call. "Hello, Mr. Johnson. This is Jason Brooks from Channel 7 News. We'd love to feature your story about the barbecue incident on our show." Michael's eyes widened in shock. Wait, really? Yes. Your story has inspired a lot of people. We'd love to share it with the world. Michael grinned, turning to Danielle. You won't believe this. Danielle laughed, shaking her head. Who knew a barbecue could change our lives? And just like that, the Johnsons went from being targeted, desperate. Susan tried everything to fix her reputation. She filed a complaint against the HOA. It was ignored. She tried to sue the people who posted the video. It was laughed out of court. She even tried to get the video taken down. But it was too late. The internet never forgets. And now, Susan was officially the most hated woman in town. Susan's final decision. She can't take it anymore. A month after the incident, a big change happened. A "for sale" sign appeared in front of Susan's house. She was moving out. Some people said she was forced out by the HOA. Others believed she just couldn't handle the humiliation anymore. Either way, by the end of the summer, she was gone, and the neighborhood was better off without her. A year after Susan left, the Johnsons hosted their biggest barbecue yet. The entire neighborhood showed up laughing, eating, and celebrating without fear. As Michael flipped burgers, he looked around at the happy crowd. Never thought a cookout would make history, he joked. Danielle smiled, watching their kids play with the other children. Well, she said, I guess we taught everyone an important lesson. Michael chuckled. Yeah, if you mess with the barbecue, you get burned. And with that, they raised their glasses in a Tosto community to justice and to a future without people like Susan. Because now, they were finally free. This is why we stand up for ourselves. When people try to bring you down, rise higher. If you believe in standing against injustice, subscribe for more powerful stories.